Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Horse's Mouth Live, the Extraordinary Advisor Show. And as always, I have guests that have great information to help you in every area of your life, especially your business. And today is absolutely no exception. We're going to talk about how to use brain science in conversations to really build deep, trusting relationships with your clients and everyone else in your life. And our guest today, I'm going to formally introduce her in a moment, but Mary Schmid, I met through Women in Financial Services. I was speaking to the Minnesota chapter, and she was part of my contact there. I met her there, and she did such a beautiful thing. It was so smart in terms of just being generous. She sent me, after that session, a copy of her book with a note and autographed, and I was like, oh, I didn't even know that she really did this. I had an idea. I didn't know she specialized with financial advisors, and I thought that was just brilliant. And I wanted to invite her on the show really for her expertise, but wanted to highlight how when you're out there giving and giving, sometimes things come back automatically from that person, but always what goes around comes around. So let me formally introduce Mary. Mary Schmid, MBA, is the author of Make or Break Conversations, how smart financial professionals land new clients and keep them for life. It's a really great book, really practical, and we'll talk about her information in there in a little bit. But Mary is also the creator of the Conversational Edge, which is a mentoring program where she works with financial leaders and their teams to know how to create a connection to build trust and leading to a different kind of conversation that makes a positive impact in the world. And Mary is a really unique specialty and gift to translate brain science into conversations that leave clients thinking, wow, this is the best financial conversation I've ever had. The reason I'm particularly interested in this is advisors, when I talk to them about what's important to them about working with their clients, or when I look on many advisors' websites, it says that we're your trusted advisor. And I don't think that I hear that many advisors talking about how they enhance those skills for themselves. How are they really a trusted advisor? And you shouldn't actually even need to say that. People should just feel that they trust you. So that's some of what we're going to talk about today. So welcome, Mary. Thank you so much for being here.
Ellen, thank you for hosting this show and having me as your guest. I'm delighted to be here.
So I'm really curious what happens in people's brains. I haven't really thought about this before at all, and I'm really interested in brain science and neuroscience. But when someone's in a conversation, what's actually happening in their brain?
What actually is happening in the neuroscience is that we start from the very beginning, and the quality of the conversation that you lead results in a high trust relationship. So when you know what the brain science is and what really goes on inside of our brain, that's invisible to most of us, you'll understand what opens people up so that we can connect and build trust, or we shy away, feel unsafe, disconnect, and distrust. It's really quite simple. The neuroscience of conversation teaches us that in every conversation, there's this busyness that's going on in our brain. It's the emotional and chemical interaction that influences what we say and what we do. And different conversations impact different parts of the brain that either open us up to trust or close us down. It's like the stoplight is in our brain because, our brain's job is to protect us. So on one hand, there's a red stoplight that says, be careful, be careful, be careful. But on the other side of our brain, there's this green light that's going, it's safe, it's okay. So imagine that you're having a good conversation and it feels good. We talk back and forth, we share with one another. What really is going on in the brain is that the prefrontal cortex gets triggered, releases oxytocin, which is the social bonding chemical, and we're open to trust. You see, trust lives in the prefrontal cortex, along with empathy, understanding, and connection. So imagine you're having a totally different kind of conversation. Maybe something was said that you didn't agree with, or you didn't quite know what to say. Your brain gets triggered. We call it the amygdala hijack. The brain gets triggered. It's signaling to you, be careful, be careful. And not only does it signal that, it covers your brain with cortisol and you don't even know what to say. You don't even know how to respond. We shut down and move into protection. And when the interesting piece of it is because trust lives in two different sides, trust lives in one side of the brain and distrust on the other. Distrust disenables, it completely shuts down the prefrontal cortex or our executive brain, and we can't even think or connect. We totally shut down. So when we know that, then we can begin to say, so what is it that I say? And what is it that I do that can make a difference in my ability to connect with people and build that trust? You see, we have good intentions in our conversations, right? Good intentions to help, be of service. But yet what we say and do may unpredictably shut other people down. So even with our best intentions, what people hear us say makes us respond in such a way that we move into protection rather than connection.
So as
And
an
what we've
advisor,
learned, yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
well, I'm just I had a conversation right before our show with an advisor that I'm doing some consulting work with, and she's lovely and really nice to be around. And she was sharing a story about how a client said to her, these conversations make me so anxious. And the advisor said, oh, is there something I can do to make this better for you? She goes, no, it's just me. So I don't think she was saying like, oh, when you said this, it made me uncomfortable. But what are some things that advisors do that make unintentionally people
Mm-hmm.
feel that all of a sudden their amygdala's gotten hijacked or they're in their, fight, flight, freeze situation? Because I'm sure it's nobody's intention to actually do that. It's probably quite the opposite. So what are some ways that advisors are actually getting a different reaction than what they probably intend?
First thing that they're doing is that using a lot of telling conversations. I ask a question, you give me an answer. I ask another question, you give me another answer. It's that the conversation becomes like Q&A. And that's what we think conversations are all about, but we know that they're much deeper. So when I do a lot of telling, oh, it sounds like an interrogation. So I get some of the facts, I get some of the data. Oh, I know what to do. Here's what you need to do. Here's the plan. Do you have any questions? It's a telling conversation. People pull back, they resist, they shut down because they're not involved, they're not included, they don't feel respected, and they're not part of the conversation. So we shut down. So you may have an advisor who tells over and over and over again, and the client goes, well, no, it's just me. I would challenge that a little bit and simply say, so what is it that I'm saying as the advisor that's triggering that? The second thing that we do is go ahead.
Well, I'm curious. So how do they, and maybe you'll get to this, but how do they start to identify, or what's the opposite? When you were saying it was ask and tell, I was getting nervous with just even thinking about being in that situation where I felt like I was at the doctor or something, where someone's like, well, what's this? And you give an answer, and what's this? So I get how that would be anxiety producing. But what might be the alternative, or how might the advisor be noticing that he or she is doing something like that?
How they would notice it is who's talking. Research shows that most of the time we do 85% of the talking. And we're either telling people what to do, asking if they understand and assume that they can do it. Or the second mistake that we make is we go into what's a selling conversation. We, the advisor, get triggered because we're thinking that our client doesn't understand. They don't get it. They're not following us. So what do? We tell even more. We bring out the charts and the graphs, and we think if we give them more information, they're going to get it. They'll change, they'll understand. So we give them more information. We bring out the charts, we bring out the graphs, and guess what? It doesn't work, because that kind of telling people what to do and then showing them exactly what they need to do shut them down. And so a selling conversation sounds like, well, we've talked about this and you would agree this is the best option, right? Boom. They feel backed into a corner. They feel information overload, and they shut down. And quite honestly, the client sitting across from you might simply say, like, what's even the point of this conversation? They knew all along what they wanted me to do, and I didn't have a say. They don't get me. So those are the two tripping points that we make in conversations. And quite honestly, Ellen, research shows that we spend 85% of our time telling, selling, and persuading.
Mm. I had a guest
And the results are,
yeah, just kind of, yeah, the results are that. I had a guest on, Lisa Dad, who's a sales expert, and she said one of the problems that advisors have is that they're always advising. And I'm hearing you say that too, like always like telling people what to do, because we've been taught like, oh, well, either that's how you sell, or that's what you're good at. So what's an alternative to that? Like, what would a conversation be like?
The alternative to that is to learn how to lead a level 3, what I call a level 3 conversation. It's one that's hallmarked by sharing and discovering. It's one of the least developed skills, and quite honestly, people are a little afraid to use it because you're not in control of the conversation. You're not asking questions for which you already know the answer. You're not telling people what to do, but rather you're approaching it from the point of, what can I learn about the other person and their situation and what they may be thinking, what they may be feeling, and what's important to them. And when the trigger comes up that we want to interrupt, we want to tell a story, we want to share our experience, we need to just relax, breathe, and simply say, it's not my show. They need to be able to finish the story that they're telling me. They need to be able to finish their thought. And so we create what I call conversational space for that to happen. We're curious. We want to know. We're interested. What are they thinking? What might they be feeling? What's really going on with them? And you see, Ellen, those kinds of conversations completely turn things around, because they trigger the brain, they trigger us into a positive state where we don't become fearful and afraid, because we sense that others are listening, that we're important, and they care.
So are there prompt questions or follow-up acknowledgments, like tell me more? What would be some good things for advisors to try to add into their conversations with clients?
That's a great question, and I love it, because it's questions for which we do not have the answer. Now, we've been taught to have open-ended questions: how, what, where, how come. But many times those are sort of cloaked as questions that we already know the answer for. Questions that we do not know the answer for are really quite different. They sound like, what was the impact that had? What were you thinking? Pause, notice the relaxed tone. Where did you learn that? How does that influence you now? They're thoughtful questions, and they provoke the person to listen to the question and search for their answer. It opens up the brain, and we begin to think about things that we may not have thought about before. We begin to open our conversations to what that looks like for us, what that feels like, where we learned that. The client then begins to put the pieces together. And the role of the advisor, got to listen. And I don't mean just listen, because we think that we listen.
Right. So what's a clue? Because I would say if I asked 10 advisors, are you a good listener? 9.5, I guess there wouldn't be a half an advisor. They also, yeah, I'm a great listener. Like, I think we all think we're good at that. But so what are some things that really make a good listener?
So beyond listening, you need to listen to connect the dots between what people are saying and what's happening in the moment. Now, people think that they're good listeners. We all think we're good listeners. But science tells us something very different. Science tells us that when we're in the listening mode, we don't hear what's really being said, because our listening brain is much quicker than the spoken word. So while people are describing or explaining or sharing, where have we gone? Boom. We heard a few words and we're off to the races, and we're solving the problem because we know what needs to happen. We know how we can help them. And oh my, we have to tell them. Second reason why we're not very good listeners is we're listening dropouts. This is what our brain does in conversations. Even as I'm speaking now, we drop out of conversations every 12 to 18 seconds. And where do we go? We think about what we're thinking about and judging what other people are telling us based on our own expertise, experience, life. So we're not really listening. We're listening dropouts. We may drop in every now and then and go, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. But that's not listening. And the person who's sitting across from you knows that. We as human beings know what it's like when people aren't listening. So you're disconnected. You're thinking about what you're thinking about. It's like a 3-ring circus is going on in your brain. You may be hearing the words that the other person is speaking, but you're not listening. What you're really listening to is your internal dialogue. What you think, what you believe, how what they say might be right, might be wrong, and how we just need to correct them. They got this all wrong. And if all truth be told, some of us just get distracted. And a client may say a word and all of a sudden, boom, our thoughts are gone. It's like, oh my God, who's going to pick the kids up from daycare today? When was I supposed to get supper tonight? And we just get distracted and off we go. So we're really listening dropouts, even though we think that we're doing a good job listening. We're only half listening.
Are there suggestions to? Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Are there suggestions in terms of how we can avoid being listening dropouts, or really, is it, you mentioned before, being really curious? What are some other ways that people can truly be there versus thinking about what they're going to say next, or how they handle that objection, or the story that they have that's even better than the one the client just had, or whatever it is?
Yeah.
What are some
tips?
The
first thing is the first tip is that they need to be really aware and make a conscious choice that the person sitting in front of them is the most important thing at this point in time. You know the thing about clearing the distractions. But you need to, when I ask to our financial advisors, you spent hours preparing for your recommendations or your case or what you're going to say. How often do you prepare yourself? Most of the time I get the response of like, what's there to prepare? I've done this millions of times. But I say, what happens immediately before our conversation in our brain affects how we show up and our openness and our willingness to be open. So we've got to do the 2-minute drill. We've got to take that 2 minutes, and it's only 2 minutes, to prepare ourselves. And how I recommend that we do that is what you teach, Ellen. It's like you've got to just breathe, relax. Some people move a little bit, but your thought patterns need to be thinking about the person that you're going to be meeting with. What is it like for them? What might their situation be? Most importantly, like, what is it like to be in conversation with me? And then visualize showing up as your best to lead this conversation where people can feel free to express themselves.
Yeah, I love that
The second
suggestion
thing,
of that. I just want to jump in real quick, Mary. I love that suggestion of that pause in between. Kelly O'Malley, who's an advisor who was in the Extraordinary Advisor Masterclass, I saw her speak last week. And one of the things that she does that she's really adapted from the class is before every single meeting, she does a 3 breath practice to get her present and centered and very clear on the vision of how she wants that meeting to go. And as you were speaking, it reminded me that what she's really doing is also, besides like visualizing how she wants that to happen, she's putting aside whatever she was dealing with before that client call or Zoom or meeting that she has, so she could be totally present with them. Yeah, is that what you
exactly.
see happening? Yeah.
That's exactly. And what happens in our brain, we get triggered to a positive state. The oxytocin starts flowing. We feel calm. We feel present. And we're able to focus, put our extreme focus on the person that's in front of us. And people laugh at that because it's, may laugh or joke about it, but it's incredibly important because science shows us that before you even speak a word, people have already judged you as to being a friend or a foe. Like when you walk into a meeting, you just sense the tone. That's our brain at work. And if they sense that you're rushed or distracted, it may have nothing to do with them, but they don't know that. Versus this calm presence. Your shoulders are back, you're relaxed. And when you first greet them, you give off that positive energy that feels safe. It feels warm and it feels welcoming. Our brain responds immediately. And so we don't have to fear.
Is this the case on a phone call as well as in person? Because when someone can't see you, is it as important that you're as present with them as you are when you're on camera or you're face to face with someone?
I think so, because people can pick up not only just the energy, but they pick up in the tone of the voice that you're using. They pick up on the rate of the speed. They pick up a relaxed sense when you're not pushing and pressuring, but rather drawing them in. They sense that. The second thing that I tell people, if you really want to open up that conversation, knock off completely the social chit chat. How's the weather? What's the sports score? Knock it off. There's an app for that. And instead, what I recommend you doing is opening up with an emotional connection. A personal, emotional connection. And what that sounds like, Ellen, is something like, I am so happy to see you. I'm glad that you're here. I'm happy to be spending time with you. Immediately, it gives another signal to the brain. This is safe. I don't have to worry, fret, be afraid. They're welcoming me. It feels really good.
Yeah,
The
I
third
love that.
thing
And
that people...
No, go ahead. Get your third. I want to
No,
make sure we hear your third thing before we run out of
yeah,
time for
and so
sure.
the third thing is, how we have the agenda and we simply say, well, we open up with an emotional connection. I'm glad that you're here today. And then we say, well, here's a business of the day. We get right into the business of the day. Pause and simply say, what's been going on for you? It's been a while since we've chatted, or I'm pleased to meet you if it's a new introduction. And when it gets time to get into the business of the day, we give them the agenda. We tell them what's going to happen. Don't do that. Instead, what you can do is simply say, what's most important for you that we cover today? And then listen. And you go second and say, well, I've been thinking about our meeting today and I'm prepared and I've got a couple ideas here about how this meeting is going to go. Let me share that with you, if I may. And you share it and then decide together how you're going to proceed. A brain loves certainty and a roadmap, but it loves it even more when we create it together. And that's what turns just a regular conversation into an extraordinary one. You have done many setups and many things that trigger the brain to say, it's safe, I'm welcome, they care.
Wow, I really love that, Mary, because I would say when you were saying, there's an agenda, I'm like, oh, that's good. She's going to share that. And you're like, no, no, no. Like, don't share that agenda.
Not yet.
So it's
Not
just
yet.
turning it on its head. You're not saying you don't have one, but I totally get how that would feel like they're part of the conversation. And, what I love about your book is there's a lot of questions in here for people to ask, those starters, like not like, how's the weather? But it just feels so good. Like, wow, it's so great to see you. I'm so glad you're here is such like a verbal hug for someone. I think it's awesome. So thank you.
And
If there's one, go ahead.
People don't do that. And when you start doing that with your clients, they're going to just look and they're not going to know what to say because it feels so good.
One last tip. Any last tip that you have for our audience today, Mary, before we have to say goodbye? I'm sure you have 10,000 tips, but just one last tip.
The one tip that I say is if you take one thing about what we've talked about today and put it into action. Because the real value of you, the financial advisor, is your ability to know what to say that makes me feel welcome. And what shuts me down that makes me move into protection. And it's not like some silly script or it's not some silly thing. This is what you need to do. It's science. And I promise, based on the results I've gotten in working with lots of clients, I promise if you do this, we'll have an extraordinary conversation that people will say, gosh, I want to work with you. And honestly, they're not going to go anyplace else. But the best part of it is they're going to say to their friends over dinner, you know what? You got to go talk to my person. They're the best.
Beautiful. I love that. And I know you have a very generous offer for our listeners and viewers today. So why don't you share what that is, Mary?
Yes, I'm gifting everyone a copy of my book. And you can get that by either emailing me or connecting with me on LinkedIn. No strings attached. I wrote the book based on the experience and the results that my clients have gotten, and they're absolutely breathtaking. And I want to share that. So the book will help you take it deeper and give you a list of questions and just sort of put together the things that we've talked about today. And if you get stuck in a conversation, call me. We'll jump on a call. I'll give you some tips and advice. And this is what I promise. No sell, no pitch, no kidding. This is a gift of generosity because, as Ellen said, the more you give and give and give, the more that I help financial professionals become better at what they do, the ripple effects impacts the whole world. So that's my gift.
It's beautiful. And if you're listening and not watching on the screen, it's Mary at Schmid, SCHMID.com. and you can find her on LinkedIn or email her, and that's super generous. Thank you so much, and thank you for all that you've shared today. I have a conversation in about a half hour with an advisor that I'm working with, and I am going to start the conversation as you suggest. I'll report back what happens. Okay.
I would
So
love to hear
thank
that.
you. Yeah. And
It's been
thank
my
you.
pleasure. And thank you for the honor of being on your show. I appreciate that greatly.
You are very welcome. Thank you. And thank each and every one of you for listening in, whether you're watching live or watching the recording. We're thrilled that you're here. Again, my name is Ellen Rogin, and you can learn more about me at ellenrogin.com. And if you go to ellenrogin.com/horse's mouth, you can download a special report, What Extraordinary Advisors Know That Others Don't. And that was through me working for the last year on finding out what's really setting advisors apart in this interesting world that we're in now. So please go ahead and download that. And my question to you is, how big of a positive impact are you willing to make? And can you be even more generous in your conversations? So remember to be great